All right, so let's be honest here for a second. And when you take that mandated company learning session online, do you actually learn something? How about those classes where you have death by PowerPoint? We love to talk about learning, yet we rarely really work on finding or providing a good learning experience. This is Yadi Caro, and I'm the organizational psychology practitioner and tech team coach. And welcome to the Hardcore Soft Skills podcast, where you learn in each episode a new skill with experts. Today we talk about learning, and my guest is Jeong. He is the host of the podcast The Science of Excellence and the CEO of learning company Sparkwise. Today we talked about what considerations we need to take to learn because yes, it is a skill. Let's listen. Hi, Vince. Thank you so much for being here on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
And I wanted to talk with you and have kind of like this conversation because I wanted to learn more about what you're doing with your own podcast. And also, you're all about the field of learning. And learning is a topic that I really haven't addressed like in each podcast episode. I hope that people learn here. But
Mhm.
in terms of the approaches to learning, the best ways to learning. So I really want to learn from you on that. So, but first,
Likewise.
yeah, thank you. And first, in terms of how I see you are, your background was in computer science. Where did you decide to? How did you ended up in the field of kind of learning and development?
Yeah. So my undergrad was in engineering. I did some computer science as a minor, but actually the main thing was operations research, which is more applied math. Um, but in my professional career, I basically haven't really done any of those things really. I started my career in consulting. I have generally been in more like business, entrepreneurship, like yeah, kind of a less technical fields. Um, in any case, for me, I got into learning because one, I'm someone who's like pretty curious about like a lot of different things. So even growing up and in school, I changed my like majors 7 times in college.
Oh, wow.
I have worked in lots of different companies throughout the years. And consulting was a choice I made because it's so diverse also, right? And and so one is that like I'm just kind of a naturally someone who likes to like learn new things. The second thing is I found my initial experience starting my career at McKinsey to be a really important starting point, and especially because they were very good at developing new grads into professionals that can operate and advise senior clients. And they had a really good pedagogy around how to do that. And I found that to be really energizing. I was one of those power users of their training, if you will. I would
Hmm.
sign up to almost like every one and go. And so I think I was also really primed to want to develop something in this field. And the third one maybe is that I've just done a lot of capability building work throughout my career, both at McKinsey doing capability building for large corporates, but also did capability building in Tanzania for an NGO and the institutions we're supporting. In Colombia, I was building an education venture. Um, right. So I think my thread has been talent development and capability building. And so learning is obviously tied to that.
Cool. You mentioned that you change choices like 7 times. What were some of those choices that you had?
Yeah, so I first entered college as an aspiring physics major.
Wow.
Um, then I don't remember the exact sequences, but I basically went through physics, chemistry, biology, philosophy, um, uh, thought about doing computer science as a full major, chemical engineering, right? Like, so I just went through a lot. And um, in part, like I also chose early courses that gave me a lot of options to explore. And so those were so I was able to like skip around a lot.
Very cool. I was a philosophy major myself, but then I switched into, well, completed bachelor's and journalism. Did journalism for a couple of years, and then the industry wasn't so great. Then transitioned into more like communications, strategic communications, and ended up in IT again in non-technical roles in IT like BA and now coaching teams, but always working in the IT space. And just recently, like completed organizational psychology. So I'm still like trying to figure out myself, like, what do I want to do when I grow up? So it's always, I always want
It's a
to,
never-ending quest.
exactly. Yeah, that's it. That's exactly it. And always new things to learn. So that's very cool. And I guess with your podcast too, it's a way to learn new things. Why did you decide to launch the podcast?
Yeah, there are two reasons. Uh, Primary motivation is obviously we're running a learning technology company, and it's really helpful for us to learn best practices from what's out there, from people who are doing really cutting edge stuff, and incorporate those learnings to what we're building. So part of it was really like understanding like product research, market research, also building connections with people who are doing really cool stuff out there. Second is more personal. I am I think if I weren't in business, I would also study something like organizational psychology or just straight on psychology. I'm very curious about what makes people and organizations function the way they do. And in fact, I have like a running document of principles and insights I've gathered over the years because it's just something that I think a lot about.
Mhm.
And I thought this was a great vehicle for me to talk to people and gather more insight because I just want to learn more about it.
That's awesome. So, and your podcast is called Learning Unbound. So, it's a great way to get to know more people. And I've learned a lot on your podcast in terms of the intricacies of learning. So, I want
And
to,
by the way,
yeah.
I'm changing the branding soon, but yeah.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. So new podcast, but if they find you on Spotify, but with your name being Young, and I'll put it on the show notes so
Okay.
people can find you.
Yeah.
And your company is Sparkwise. So is the company you decided to create it? When did you decided to create that company?
We launched about 3 years ago.
All right. And the reason is it to provide or a particular service in terms of the um, for learning experience? What is the main objective?
Yeah. Um, the problem that we saw was that if you actually look at a lot of learning technologies that have proliferated over the past couple of decades,
Mhm,
um, there are very few that actually scales really good learning that's built on learning science.
mhm,
Like a lot of the and so scaling learning is just it's just a hard thing, right?
mhm,
So
mhm,
oftentimes when you go for scale, um, it's become like content production and content distribution.
mhm,
That's just not how people learn. Like great learning requires effort. You got to create an environment where people try and then they discuss and they practice, they reflect. Like you have to create that environment.
mhm,
Um, but for a long time, there was no technology that did that really well. And
mhm,
the only way organizations could do that is through like investing really heavily into very curated, like high touch learning experiences led by experts and, like high touch workshops or coaching or stuff like that. And so we thought there was an opportunity, especially post pandemic when everyone moved to virtual and suddenly now knew how to do more than just have a call virtually, but actually could work, that we could take that in-person
mhm.
experience that's incredibly high impact but low scale and make it super scalable.
That's interesting. And in terms of what you mentioned about creating learning environments, I don't think a lot of organizations and or at work that are really thinking about that, because they say take a go, they take the annual training, click here, and it's all like click, click, click to learn something new. Um, what are some of the things that miscons or not, or errors that you've seen organizations or teams make when it comes to like offering learning, quote unquote, to the teams and their employees?
Yeah, I mean, by the way, just stepping back, I think there's definitely time and place for the kinds of quick videos or messages, right? So, I recently read an article by L&D leader at Figma, Eric Grant, like, who actually described learning, um, like types of learning in a really clear way, right? You can divide learning by, is it active or is it passive? And is it
Mm-hmm.
synchronous or is it asynchronous? And different ones have different pros and cons. And I think often the errors that people seem to make is you pick the wrong type of learning for a certain objective and hope it's going to work.
Hmm.
So, so for example, most of the e-learning out there that people are used to are asynchronous passive learning experiences. You're on your own, you're reading something, or you're watching a video. Um, that is really good for really simple knowledge transfer. But if you're trying to get people to become better leaders or better problem solvers, better communicators, or just build judgment, you don't build judgment by doing that, right? The same way
Mm-hmm.
you can't learn how to bike by just watching someone bike. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think it's actually the mismatch of the learning modalities that I often see um, in organizations. So that's one error that comes to mind. The second one is actually, it's less an error, but just like a literal limitation, which I guess we're trying to tackle, is that the synchronous active type of experience, like that is really good for building skills and so on. So bringing people together, they get to really practice and learn. It's usually so expensive and high effort to orchestrate that it gets only offered at the very top echelon of an organization.
Yeah.
And yet the people who actually really need it,
Yes.
the sort of the new grads, the people who are just entering the workforce, like that actually need a lot more skill development, are not getting any of that. So there's just
Mm-hmm.
a mismatch on where really high impact learning is being delivered in the organization.
Yeah, I agree, because when it comes to like all the folks in the middle, like even mid managers, even like you mentioned new grads, but also like all those folks, like it's reserved, it seems, for any coaching or any for CEOs. But the people that are doing the work, like hands on, like managing the people per se, like day to day, definitely need that in that type of learning. And a lot of times I've seen it's like it depends on the individual to go ahead and seek that out instead of being offered by the organization to do that. What are some of the good examples of passive learning? Because it seems like always like it's expensive and everything, that active learning will be great, but are there good examples of when to just use like, hey, watch a video for like passive learning experiences?
Yeah. So I think, okay, so what are some of the limitations of passive learning and when can you overcome them? So part of reasons why passive learning is not great is that most people are really bored out of their mind doing it.
Yeah.
They're not engaged.
Hmm.
Now, people will naturally engage on their own if this is like in the way of them doing something that they actually just have to do. So I think passive learning could be fine if like it's a literally like something they have to watch in order to do the task they have to do right now.
Yeah.
Like some standard operating procedure or some like way of doing a task, right?
Yeah.
And I think little bite-sized content
Mm.
could be good. Also, another benefit of like passive asynchronous content is that it is hyper flexible. You can look at it anytime on demand, right? So it's particularly good for people who are always on the go and like their schedule is kind of unpredictable. And so, right, so you can meet them where they are because their schedule doesn't allow them to like sit down and really have uh, like a scheduled time for learning, let's say. So I think in those cases, passive learning can be effective and is honestly a better way to do it than trying to bring them into a class and do it when it's like sort of like just kind of
Mm,
like get the information delivered and move on.
yeah, that's good example. And also, in terms of learning, when it comes as individuals to approaching a learning experience, do you have any suggestions for the folks who are like just coming in? I have to take this. I have to learn something. I'm in this class. Are there things that we should all do as individuals? So, like, if you come in, come prepared, do X, Y, Z. Like any particular either mindset or tips that could help us really absorb the knowledge.
In like an active learning environment.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, yeah. So I definitely think mindset is key. And why is mindset so important? Because one of the drivers of you actually retaining anything is, are you paying attention and are you focusing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are you trying? And so, what are some of the mindset pillars that we found to be important? One, I mean, everyone talks about this. People need to understand why this is relevant to them. A lot of adults, especially, won't pay attention if they don't think it's relevant. They have a strong
Mm,
perspective on what they need and what they don't, and you better make them believe that thing that they're about to do is worth their time. Um, I think the second thing is actually creating an environment that actually creates a bit of a beginner's mindset or recognition that you have room to improve. Um, I think one of the things that people talk a lot about is the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? Like we all suffer from it. It's like a human trait where there are these points where you totally overestimate your abilities, and um, that's natural. But if someone really needs to learn X, but they're overestimating their ability, they'll just not think the thing that's being presented to them is relevant to them because they already think they know it.
yeah.
So I think it's important actually for the pedagogy to be able to help people reframe their thinking if that's the case and say, okay, actually this is what excellent looks like, and this is likely where you are, and if you bridge this gap, you can do even better, right? So I think it's thinking sort of how do you like create those mindset shifts for people to be open to learning is the second one that comes to mind.
That's awesome. I like that because even when you think that you have to go into a classroom and you think that, oh, I've learned so much about this, but even if you let's say you do, but even with you with that mindset, I think there's always something to learn, right? There's always something that you will absorb from the experience. So yeah, I think that's very important to come with that mindset. Great advice on that. When in terms of learning styles, because we hear a lot about like I'm a very visual learner or I'm a more auditory learner. What are your thoughts on that? Are those things like proven true? Are those misconceptions? What are your thoughts in general of like when we talk about like I'm a visual learner or things like that?
Yeah, I mean, you see a lot of rigorous like and vigorous debates on this on
Yes.
I've seen it a lot on LinkedIn. I mean, scientifically, people say learning styles are misconceptions and they're really not valid.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, you know, I also am someone that says, okay, well, if that's what the research says, I don't think like emphasizing learning styles as a way to like differentiate and deliver learning is productive. With that said, um, I do think a lot about diversifying the ways in which you present information and letting people engage with a certain content in different ways that just helps you create different neural connections. Like I can imagine that's actually very useful. And for some people, certain neural connections are more natural than others to make, maybe. Like if you're not a great English speaker, reading a bunch of text might be harder, right? So I think there are definitely ways to help support people where they are, whether it be whatever they're most comfortable with and comes most naturally. Um, but yeah, I think about more as in like creating a diverse environment when you deliver versus like trying to anticipate, oh, like you're a auditory learner, and like sort of putting them in a box, because I'm not sure if that's actually the case. It might actually be that for certain things, I'm able to understand it better when I look at it, but for other things, maybe like hearing it is enough. Like I don't know, like so yeah, we think about it just in terms of diversity.
That's great. Yeah, like and the concept of putting people in a box, so like, oh, since you're an auditory learner, like let's not show you anything, putting everything like up the auditory learning. So creating like the concept of creating like a different learning, integrating different things into the learning experience is great. In your podcast too, you've talked about or touch upon when it comes to soft skills, and this soft podcast is all about the soft, like quote unquote soft skills, because it's it's a variety of things, social skills, it's communication, negotiation. So I try to address everything that has to do with like the non-technical, like go like step by step. However, I've discovered that a lot of the skills that we discuss here do depend on sort of like methods and techniques, when it comes to writing, speaking, or learning to be a better listener. There's techniques that we could do for that. But what are your thoughts in general about soft skills, quote unquote, and in terms of helping people how to, let's say, learn them? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Um, we take a very particular approach that was inspired by what we saw often in the way that McKinsey used to develop different skills there, and also I think a lot of like top business schools use as well. Um, so maybe conceptually, the way we think about it is, one, I think for a lot of the soft skills, they're kind of abstract in nature, and so it's really helpful to give people practical frameworks or tactics that help dimensionalize the thing, right? Like, for example, like what does it mean to build trust, or what does it mean to communicate well? Like it's not like well described. So one is, can you create mental scaffolding for people that help them understand great looks like X, and like it break it down to something more concrete, first of all. Then I think we help them practice those concrete strategies. And the way that we create a practice environment is in a group setting where you're working with peers, where sometimes you work alone and then present to others, other times you work together. But the collaboration and the peer feedback and the working together creates a naturally very motivating environment. Because humans are generally like very social beings by nature. Like if you gave the same set of exercises, but if you were like alone, people will do it for a few minutes and stop, because it's actually not that fun to do it alone, but it's a lot more fun when you're doing it together. So we try to create that environment. And then at the end, you of course there's like feedback from both peers, but also you get to see what great looks like crafted by experts. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think people are able to continuously hone their judgment around um, the skill. And then, of course, and then there's reinforcement and additional sort of practice sessions in the future, right? But if you think about basically that flow, it's really like first create a mental scaffolding so you can like grasp the thing conceptually, then giving you really good space to practice it, and then reinforcing it over time is how we think about um, soft skill development. By the way, you might agree with it with me that I think generally I don't like the word soft skills,
Yeah,
but yes,
I agree, actually. Sorry. It's like it sounds. What don't you like? And I have my reasons, of course. It sounds very like nice to have, or like easy. So, what are your reasons for not liking
I
the concept?
no, I think that's what most people say, and I think I generally agree with that.
Hmm.
Um, it uh, it feels like it's just not describing the skill in the way that it should be. Anyways, but yeah,
Hmm.
that's just I guess semantics.
No, yeah, exactly, and that's why they're for me hardcore soft skills. It's like, well, it's
You're
how people will
rephrasing.
recognize reframes. They're hard, and they're like kind of it. It takes a sort of courage as well to be able to practice the skills in terms of being a good communicator or being negotiating. It takes a lot of like effort to be good in this skill. So yeah.
Yeah. Um, I mean, that actually just brings me to like to a thought that I hadn't really quite made the connection before. Is that we actually think I think we teach soft skills more like hard skills in the sense
Mm,
what people traditionally call skills like does sound soft when you describe it because it's not tangible. It's very right. It's not
mm-hmm.
like
Yeah.
in code like this, right? It's more like I can communicate well. What does that mean?
Yes. Yeah.
But the way we do is to turn it into something that's like harder and more concrete, right? Communicating well means, for instance, that you lead with your answer and get to your point faster. That is far more concrete. Like, like if you want to be efficient, right? And so, like for example, we create those kinds of um, strategies and try to turn them into, I guess, like harder skills.
I love that, and in being able to have the end in mind, because we say like, oh, I want to be a better listener. What does
Right.
that mean, really, to be a better listener? To establishing the technical things to like, oh, now I could consider myself one because I meet X, Y, Z or something like that. So I like that. That's awesome. Before we go, I do have a one more question in terms of what things are you learning now? What are some of the things that you're enjoying learning about right now?
Um, I the thing that I love about building Sparkwise right now is that I feel like I continuously learn something about human nature
Mm.
and how individuals, teams, organizations work. And so I was telling you that I'm reframing our podcast. It's most likely going to be called the science of excellence.
Cool.
And one of the things that I really like learning about is how does excellence get created and scaled? Um,
Yeah.
and because it really you need to really tap into like how humans learn and behave in order to do that. So that's what I'm learning and studying nowadays by talking to people like yourself. And so yeah, that's been fun.
That's awesome, and I look forward to learn more because again, I've learned a lot from your podcast episodes from the experts that you bring in terms of the different approaches and the things it take to have a good learning experience and to and how the brain works when we are absorbing information. So a lot of good info there. So, what is the best way for people to reach you?
Yeah, just reach me on LinkedIn, I guess. You
Awesome.
can find me there. And if there are things you want to talk about or collaborate, happy to connect. Anyways, thanks for having me today.
Thank you. It was great too, and I hope we have future conversations as well because I've learned a lot from just from this conversation in terms of the learning environments and creating the conditions for that. So thank you so much.
Thank you.